So I've taught about science and religion in a variety of ways, like 20-minute sermons, several times one session classes that are a little over an hour, three session class, and I have both one session classes and three session classes on my website. I think maybe even on my website I once did this in Spanish. I think I may have I'm not sure about that, but when I was in Guatemala City for high holidays, I taught a couple of classes in Spanish. But what I'm planning on doing is just taking as much time as we like talking about science and religion. And and I also mentioned that I have been approached to write a book on the subject. I don't know if I'm going to do it, but if I do it, this will be very helpful to me to go through it slowly and carefully and to hear your questions about it. Um, so I'm curious, actually, before we get started, what is your thought on science and religion? I have a feeling that I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm not sure.
Well, I had one thought. I tell
Yeah,
you,
go ahead.
when I was uh, when I was in Chabad, I was there for about 10 years. And it looks like they take God literally. In other words, he lives someplace. Wherever he lives, he does something and he lives someplace that connects to people. How that happens, I don't know, but you know what? Somebody told me, he said the mezuzah you have on your door, you got to change the paper inside because God is in there and he's monitoring what you're doing. And if it's not just right, it can be bad for you. So some people actually change the paper just so that it can be better.
Yeah,
And
to be specific, you're actually supposed to inspect the technically it's called a cloth, the
yeah,
scroll,
that's right.
to make sure it's in good
Kosher.
shape.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the parts of this will deal with issues like this. I'm sure I've told this story to some of you, but I was once on a flight to Israel, and I was sitting next to a chassid, and he had a deformed hand,
Yes.
and he told me as we got into a deep discussion, he told me that this happened in an industrial accident.
Yes.
His hand was mangled, and after his hand was mangled, his rabbi, probably in the same vein that you were talking about, Paul, told him to check his mezuzahs. And on
Okay.
one of the mezuzahs, where it says you should love God b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, no, it said bind these signs as a symbol upon your hand and on your arm, and where it says hand, that part of the mezuzah flaked of the writing had flaked off.
No kidding. Oh
So
my God.
his understanding was because the writing on the mezuzah for his hand had flaked off, that's why his hand was mangled in an industrial accident.
Wow.
Now, so that idea really fascinates me
Yeah.
because on one hand, I find that horrible, insulting, offensive. It's hard for me
Hard
to
to believe.
express my distaste for something like that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, sorry with all the hand references. On the other hand, the there's this idea that if only I would check my mezuzahs, and if only I would do all of these things, I would be protected from accidents like that.
Right.
And I think there's comfort and power in that idea. So
Yes.
I absolutely agree with you that that sort of is the outlook of Chabad. And there's a writer, Gerald Schroeder, who is I've heard him speak at Chabad a couple of times, and I have several of his books who writes about science and religion, and he will go to great pains to make understand the physics to prove the literal truth of the Torah.
Wow.
6 days and everything else. Ken
Yes.
or Patricia.
I'm my initial thought is that science and religion are two ways of looking pretty much at the same thing, two ways of sort of examining the world and how it works, but they're not incompatible as some people say. I think they're just two different ways, two different sides of looking at the same thing.
Yeah, and as we'll see, that's one of the approaches. One approach, and I have a long PowerPoint on all of this, is that they're incompatible. Either the universe is 13.5 billion years old, or it's, what is it, 5,765 years old, and it can't be both. Although, as Gerald Schroeder, a physicist, would say, according to Einstein's actually special relativity, it actually can be both. You can actually be, whether you're in God's inertial reference frame or our inertial reference frame, all of us physicists sitting here understand exactly what I mean by that. You can actually be both. So he goes to great pains to do that. So on one hand, it may seem incompatible. On another hand, again, just as you said, it may be just two things, and they're not necessarily incompatible, but they sort of treat separate areas. On another hand, they may actually help each other, and that's really what we're going to look at. Any other thoughts about, hi Joanne, about science and religion before we jump in with
I do have one more thought.
Go ahead, Alan. Hold on, Paul.
Sure.
Alan, go ahead.
Well, I don't think about this very often, but at one point I used to think that when people didn't understand anything, they associated it with religion or with God, like fire even, or things like that, or weather. And as we learn more things, you realize that it's that our basis is more on physics, let's say, rather than religion. However, in any dialogue, there is always a limit to what I can understand or most people can understand. So you have to continue with what I would describe as faith, the things you don't know, but you want to believe, but you can't prove. Then that's where faith kicks in.
That's
Yeah. So sometimes that's described, I think, as the God of the gaps. So we have gaps in our science, and so we attribute that to God. And there's sort of a sense with that if only we know more and more about science, then we won't need God for anything anymore.
But to finish that, I don't actually use that anymore, because I also think the important point that I think that we study or say Jewishly is that you can't see God, but you can see the results, the works of God. And nature is the example, but there's other examples. So so often when I'm in a beautiful setting, I'm feeling like I'm in the presence of God, but it doesn't have a rational answer for that. The way.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Paul, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I did. I don't know if anybody else was at this lecture on Cassini that was going to Saturn. That was last Wednesday at TA. And after the meeting, I asked the gentleman to please come. I have some questions for him, and I said, "Do you believe that God exists in the universe?" And he said to me, he thought for a minute, and he didn't look right in my eyes. He looked a little way askance from me. And he says, "I have to tell you, I don't believe that God had anything to do with the universe. It was just it's something we have now that we talk about that is part of our life. But no, I don't believe anything about God creating anything."
Okay, so that's one of the things we're going to look at first. I would say is evidence for the existence of God in the universe. Okay,
Right.
Any other thoughts before we dive into PowerPoint? Yes, Cindy.
Yeah, so I'm real comfortable reading the Bible through the lens of metaphor. And I think Paul mentioned that word earlier. So I see metaphor as expansive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm real comfortable with science as a language of measurement, which I see as more reductionistic, not in a bad way, in a detailed kind of intimate way. So they're different, and I think I'm not sure who said before, two different ways of looking at similar things.
Okay, so similar to what Ken said. Jerry? Jerry, you have your hand up. Jerry Wissett. You're muted.
I was trying
Okay,
to.
no problem.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been to several Chabad classes over the years, and I see that they have become better attuned to modern thinking and have used, as many of them are, doctors in fields of science, to see that it can work together just
Mhm.
fine.
Yes. Okay.
Religion and science doesn't have to clash at all.
No, it does not.
Okay.
That's what I
So
think.
yeah, so that's
Yeah.
sort of again option number one, and we'll see this later. Option number one, absolutely inconsistent. Option number two, they are not inconsistent, but they're looking at different things in different ways. Option number three, they can work together. And just to give away my answer is option number four is neither can do its job without the other. They not only can work together, but they are necessary for the other. And you'll have to wait till the exciting conclusion to see how I arrive at that. Okay, so I am going to go into screen share. And I trust it's always, there you are. Okay, so I trust you can see it. Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I say a natural and necessary partnership. So, actually, I guess last time I taught this, I taught it in 4 classes. So now I've just said we'll have 4 different sections, but I suspect we're going to meet more than 4 times on this. So section number 1 is going to talk about the nature of scientific knowledge and religious knowledge. Section number 2 is what I often talk about, and I'll repeat this over and over again. I believe there are 2 leaps of faith in this subject. One is there a God? And the second is, does God care? And I think, in my way of thinking about it, those are separate leaps of faith. And then the fourth one is sort of what I hinted at just a moment ago, that the partnership is that science and religion have a partnership, and the partnership is necessary. Okay, and I think most of you know I have a website, and on my website at the moment, I will probably add these videos at some point. If you go to classes and drop down, there's one that says science and religion, and then there's videos of a 3-session class. There's a bibliography of materials on this subject. There are significant quotes, and I am going to be interweaving these quotes throughout the discussion. But I also have like, I don't know, 2 pages or 3 pages of interesting quotes about science and religion. Oh, and there's videos of the different sessions. Okay, so first, the nature of scientific and religious knowledge. So you may have heard me say this before. This is why one of the major reasons I became religious. And this idea I was first exposed to in a book by Dennis Prager and Joseph Telushkin called The 9 Questions People Ask About Judaism. And there are 2 points in the book which for me had a very powerful impact on me. So point number 1 is, without God, there is no objective morality, with, I would say, the emphasis on the word objective. So the question is, what is the source of ethics? Is it popular opinion, or is there something beyond this?
Right. Exactly.
So, another way of stating it is, was Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot wrong, or were each entitled to their own values? What Hitler did, what Stalin did, was not illegal under the laws in which they existed. Everything that Hitler did was legal according to the laws of Nazi Germany, and so on. We can talk about international law, which is an interesting subject. But the question is, and even in news today, if you have popular opinion saying this is okay, does that mean it's really okay? Or is there some higher source of ethics than people's opinion? And if there's a higher source of ethics other than people's opinion, I would say that's one of the things that I would attribute to the idea of God. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is that without God, there is no intrinsic meaning to life. So if we reject the idea of God, what we're left with is that we are living in a scientific accident. So Paul, the lecturer, I think the honest opinion of the person you spoke to was that, no, I mean, this is the universe, and here we are in the universe, and it's some kind of cosmic accident but there's no inherent meaning to it. And
Right.
sometimes the way I describe it is I say, okay, here's a sheet of paper. The sheet of paper is an organic hydrocarbon. If I burn the sheet of paper, I get carbon dioxide, I get some water vapor, I get some energy, and then the material left behind we'll describe as ash. If I burn a baby, I
Right.
get some water vapor, I get some carbon dioxide, I get some energy, and I get some, non-combustible, mostly bone, left behind. Speaking chemically, there's no difference between burning a sheet of paper or burning a baby. I mean, from a scientific point of view, they're pretty much the same. So the question is there any meaning to one or the other? We find ourselves in a universe. Is there meaning to our lives, or are we kidding ourselves about it?
Yeah.
That's another thing which had a big impression on me. So, the way I stated here, if the universe and all that's in it is purely a scientific accident, there's no ultimate meaning to it all. And by the way, I can't prove any of these. I simply refuse to live my life as though there is no absolute morality and there is no meaning to life. That's why I call these leaps of faith. This idea, and I'm going to come back to it over and over again, prove that God exists. What they prove to me is I have to live my life as though God exists. Okay, I have a lot of quotes, and one of the joys I think this evening is to read them and have you reflect on them. So Will and Ariel Durant, I believe they are world famous and noted historians, said, there is no significant example in history before our time of a society successfully maintain a moral life without the aid of religion. Going back further, in George Washington's farewell address, he says, let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in the exclusion of religious principle. And of course, by the way, I would hasten to add that there are many religious people that are rotten to the core, and misusing their religions. And I suppose there are religions which also teach some awful things. Okay, I got more quotes. Sorry. Einstein, you heard of him. Without God, these are quotes about an intrinsic meaning to life. To know the answer to the question, what is the meaning of human life, means to be religious. This would be, this is notable because it's said by one of the great minds in physics. Another one, I think I should actually have little references to who these people are. To believe in God means to understand the question about the meaning of life. To believe in God means to see that the facts of the world are not the end of the matter. To believe in God means to see that life has a meaning. And I have lots of quotes from Jonathan Sacks, and sometimes I repeat the quotes. Jonathan Sacks is the former chief rabbi of Great Britain. He died, I think, a little over a year ago. And he wrote a wonderful book called The Great Partnership, which actually convinced me for the last 10 or 20 years that I didn't need to write a book about science and religion. And this, I think, is his best quote. Science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts them together to see what they mean.
That's great.
Sorry? Yeah.
Great.
So, and this is actually, in a way, a comment on the point that some of you made, that they are, in fact, two different ways of looking at the same thing. If I want to know, how to shoot a rocket to get a space station in orbit and go to the moon and so on, I need to understand all the detailed physics of those things. I need to take these things apart to see how they work and get every piece working together. Now the question is, what's the meaning of wanting to explore space? So I love that quote from Jonathan Sacks. Carl Jung, one of the early psychotherapists. Cheryl will correct me if I'm wrong. Among all, this is also a very significant one. I'd actually be interested in your reaction to this, Cheryl. Among all my patients in the second half of life, There has not been one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life, and none of them had really been healed who did not regain his religious outlook. Okay, there's an eloquent response from Cheryl.
You know, really, okay, so Jung says that there are
And I don't know a
plenty
thing
of
about Jung,
people-
actually.
There are plenty of people who probably also lose their religious outlook as they get older. They become more cynical. I know plenty of people who become agnostic or atheist as they get older. So
Yeah,
I
so the
guess it
interesting
depends on
question
your-
which
it depends
which
on
Jung
your
raises,
standpoint.
I guess the question which Jung raises is it if you have problems with life, and everyone has problems with life, I often quote, it's not one of the quotes here, but a quote not from a rabbi, but rabbi's mother, Helen Telushkin, Joseph Telushkin's mother, would say, "The only people I know without serious problems in their life are people I don't know very well." When you meet someone at a cocktail party, everything is great. When you get to know anyone at any level of depth, you realize that everyone has serious problems in their life. So the
Yes.
interesting question is, so we all have serious problems in our life. That's why, Cheryl, you make a living.
Yes.
And so the question is, does the religious outlook help? Does the transition to a religious outlook help that? Or does a transition to an agnostic or atheist outlook help it? I actually don't know the answer to that. But fortunately, Alan does. Yes.
No, I was going to say, since religion is kind of a word that means different, even the Webster could answer it, it means different things to different people. The way I would answer this thing about outlook evolves because of me studying Judaism. I could be studying Christianity, it doesn't matter. If you study your religion and you learn the history and the values and the practices, then you are going to look at religion differently over time from your education, the way I feel I do.
By the way, I often comment the word religion comes from the same root, I think both Greek and Latin, for the word for ligament, the same root as the word for ligament, that which connects people. I think there are religions like communism, there are movements like communism, socialism, which really, in a very real sense, are religions. They may not be God-centered religions, but I think they are religions. One of the things that strikes me along these lines, and again, I'll bow to Cheryl's greater professional knowledge on this, is the power of 12-step programs, which fundamentally have a higher power base, certainly as they begin. And my sense is that they are very helpful for people who are suffering from addictions and addictions over a wide variety of areas. I don't know if there are other programs. Actually, I'm curious, Cheryl. Do you see other programs that are equally helpful,
Well,
or do you think 12-step is sort of a uniquely helpful thing?
The problem with the 12-step programs is it's impossible to put it to scientific tests. So stating that they are successful, nobody measures it because there's no way to get into these programs to do that kind of research since it's based on anonymity. And everybody who comes to the group varies with time. So you can't keep the same cohort and measure things. So
yeah, you certainly can't do
So this whole idea that AA is successful, yes and no. Scientifically, we have no way to put it to a test with a control group.
Okay.
On the other hand, there are people who will give you anecdotal stories that it is helpful to them. But I can cite just as many people, and many of them right now are in the hospital in my ward there, who sometimes find AA helpful or the 12 steps. And a lot of times they relapse, 10, 20, 30, right. 40, 50 times. So is the 12-step program really helpful to them when they're constantly relapsing?
Yeah, I'll report one thing
there are
sorry.
plenty of people who don't like the focus on God. So, I usually tell them, well, your higher power doesn't have to be a God.
Right.
And there are some specific AA groups for the non-religious. I have, there's a big issue that so many of these AA meetings are held in churches.
Hmm.
And why doesn't a synagogue get involved in sponsoring an AA meeting? Thus leading to the fact that, for years, many people believed there were no Jewish alcoholics and
Right.
drug addicts, which is also
Mhm.
preposterous because I know many alcoholics and drug addicts are Jewish.
Hmm.
They don't
Yeah.
like the Christian overtones of some of these things.
Mhm.
And there are some programs, even online, that will say they emphasize less this higher power notion.
A quick comment, and I know some other people want to comment as well. First of all, I would say, well, not all of them, but many of the synagogues I've served do host 12-step meetings. I once was, when I was a rabbinic student, as an intern, I staffed a retreat, a retreat for Jews in recovery, and it was at a campsite, and Debbie Friedman did the music, and it was wonderful. And I will never forget a heated discussion between people attending and Debbie, where Debbie was focusing on Judaism and Torah, and the people attending said for them, the central book in their life is not Torah, but the big book, which is the central text of a 12-step program. And I think Debbie tried to defend Torah, and unsuccessfully. These people, for them, the 12-step program was the center of their life. And I once worked with a Jew in recovery who said for him, his meetings were the most important thing in his life, because if he stopped that, the rest of his life would fall apart. So he was clearly one of the people for whom 12-step worked. And I know, and just again, anecdotally, there's a resistance, there's concern among Jews in 12-step programs because they use the Lord's Prayer. And I would just point out the only thing that's not Jewish about the Lord's Prayer is the name, because the Lord they're talking about in the Lord's Prayer is Jesus. But everything within that prayer is Jewish. In fact, there's a lot of suspicion that it's originally written in Aramaic. Joanne.
So, I just think that there are ways to plug in religion when you are focusing in on feelings. And, yesterday we had a group for Rosh Chodesh, and Cheryl, if you recall in the outline, everything that we went over, it was related to Purim, but it plugged into feelings as well. Different beliefs that might be beneficial for you. So I believe that religion can really kick in if you wanted to, as a healing mechanism. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Paul.
the topic of the group was, what masks do you wear?
Right.
And do you change them? And do you have to hide that you're Jewish? Or, and it had to, it was tied into Purim.
Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, I want to talk about a specific incident that happened to me with somebody in my car going with me on a road. I was going down Temple Avenue, and on the side of Temple Avenue, I was going towards Ponderosa, and there was a shopping cart on the sidewalk. And it looked like it was going to go into the traffic because the sidewalk was coming down on a slope, and the shopping cart could come rolling down onto the street, and somebody could bang into it with their car. So the person sitting next to me in the car said nothing, and I said, "You know what?" He happened to be my uncle. I said, "Uncle Marvin, I need to stop. I need to stop my car, and I need to go back around where I came from, come back down the streets and see if that shopping cart's still there, because I need to get out of my car. I need to put it someplace that's the shopping cart will not go into the street, and leave it there." And what caused that happen? What caused that to happen to me? Why did I choose to do that? Why didn't I just want to leave it there and not care about it? Is that something inside of me that's living, that's saying, I have
Yeah, so
I have a desire to take this cart and put it someplace. Who is driving me there? Who is driving me?
So I would say, in some ways that's a difference between religious law and civil law.
Yeah,
Civil law basically says you don't do things to hurt someone. You
Yes.
typically don't have affirmative law saying you have to help people.
right.
That's what, government is for. But religious law, certainly Jewish, Christian, Muslim law would say, no, it goes beyond that. You're not to stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. You
Exactly.
actually have to take action. Okay, let's move on.
And is that a godlike thing? Is it that God come down to me
Well, I
and
would say it's a
pop into
mitzvah.
my head and say, you got to
No,
do that?
yeah. So don't get all mystical on me. It's a mitzvah. It's a commandment. Don't stand
Right.
idly by the blood of your neighbor. Basically,
okay.
if something can hurt someone else, you have an obligation. You are commanded to resolve that. There's another one, which is don't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. So
Right.
that could be that. Okay. So here's one of my favorite examples of the way to discuss this. So this morning, on the kitchen stove, there was that teapot, and the teapot was boiling. Some of you may have heard me talk about this before. But so the question is, why is the teapot boiling? Okay, so this is for you to answer. And this is, it's not terribly, terribly deep. So why is the teapot boiling?
There's a fire underneath it.
There's a fire underneath. Okay, so there's electricity, there's a fire, the stove heated the water to its boiling point. I could talk for 20 minutes on the physics of boiling and put you all to sleep, but I won't.
Really? Wow.
So Aristotle called this the efficient cause, how the phenomenon takes place. But there's another answer to the question, why is the teapot boiling? Can anybody think of another answer to that question?
Why is it boiling?
Yeah, Henry?
Well, somebody had to put it on the stove and make it happen. Put water in it and go through the whole process. Somebody had to initiate the process of why I got teapot.
I think you're heading in the right direction, but you're still dealing with the mechanics. Alan, you're muted. You're muted, Alan.
What comes to mind is connected to creation.
Okay, I'm definitely going to go there. But why is the teapot boiling?
Because in the system that's well beyond my knowledge of physics and
now you're getting into thermodynamics.
No, God, because God wants us to have
No, don't get that deep.
Okay.
Henry.
Let me try again. Because somebody wanted some tea.
Yes, because my wife wanted tea.
Simple.
That's why the teapot was boiling. So Aristotle called this the final cause, the reason the phenomenon takes place. So now the question is, of course, do I have to choose between one of those answers being correct, thermodynamics and heating the stove and so on, or another answer to the question is because my wife wanted tea? Do I have to decide one of those are correct and the other's wrong necessarily, or can they both be correct? Clearly, they both can be correct.
Yeah.
So now the question is, why is there a universe?
Yes.
Okay,
Exactly.
I said I was going to get into the universe.
There you go. Why is it?
Answer number one is everything we know about cosmology. The Big Bang and all the physics, which I'm right there beside you. I don't understand all the physics for that either. And answer number two is because God wanted a universe. So, of course, my major point here is, do we have to choose between one correct and one incorrect answer? And just like the teapot, they both can be correct. They don't have to be correct, but they both can be correct. So now there's an interesting question. Why did God want a universe? And I always like to sometimes sort of ask people to come up with their own answers on this, but I guess I didn't postpone it in this slide. So the traditional answer I would say both in Jewish and Christian terms of why did God create the universe, which I really don't like, is if God is to be praised, then we need folks around to praise God. Okay, that actually makes sense to some people's personalities. I can't think of one in particular, but if God is to be praised, we need a choir to praise God. And the answer I prefer is because God likes stories, or another way of saying that God wants to be in a relationship with humanity. Therefore, God created a universe that would bring about people and humanity. And God, that's the kind of God we have now, a personal God who enjoys that stuff. Jerry.
Well, God could have been pretty lonely out there on his own, and just as much as when God perhaps created man, said man should not be alone as well,
Oh,
because
yeah. That's actually a nice way of putting it. God creates the first man, and says it's not the first thing in the Bible that is said not to be good is loneliness. It is not good that the man should be alone, that the man needs an ezer kenegdo, which is often translated as a helpmate or something that sounds vaguely demeaning, but in the Hebrew it's not demeaning at all. Ezer means help, and God is described as a help. And kenegdo, keneged actually in Hebrew has this sense of the scales of balance, of being in opposition. So I quite often talk about this at weddings, and a wonderful attribute of a couple is that they are not the same, that they in fact support each other by being different from one another and not being afraid to express that difference. And in fact, the title of my thesis in rabbinical school was Ezer Kenegdo, toward a theology of Jewish-Christian partnership, in that same vein. But I never thought about it in those terms, Jerry, that God needed an Ezer Kenegdo. So God can't do the work of God. This is actually a central idea in mysticism, which is astounding if you think about it, that God cannot do the work of making the world a better place without humanity, which is actually mind-blowing. The more you think about it, the more mind-blowing that is, that God needs people. One of Abraham Joshua Heschel's books is called God in Search of Man. So another one which I always like to bring up at this point in time, the Talmud records a debate which lasted 2.5 years as to whether it would have been better if humanity had not been created. Okay, so now we're going to take a vote. You can raise your physical hands for this. How many of you think it would have been better if humanity had not been created? Raise your hands. Okay. And how many of you think it is better that humanity has been created? Raise your hands. Okay. Well, the rabbis voted in the first. They said it would have been better had humanity not been created, but since here we are, we need to make the best of it. Alan, you had your electronic hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, am I unmuted? I'm unmuted.
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
I was thinking of something that when we started in Genesis and we talk about God creating the world, there was something that existed before God created the world as we come of it.
Yeah, so the opening of Genesis seems to, well, it says in the beginning, or in the beginning of God's creation, there's all sorts of controversy about what the Hebrew means.
Right.
The world was empty and void, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face, maybe even the face of the waters. I'm actually speaking tomorrow night about water and fire in Judaism. So it's not creation ex nihilo. It's not creation from nothing. There is something going on, and then God says, let there be light, and then there was light. So yes.
This point about when we talk about having a partner tell stories and stuff, that's a sequel, the way I'm trying to look at this, a sequel to the what existed before, that evolved in the way we understand God to the world that was created the way we understand it in our, at that point in time, because we, in some studies, like you just suggested, we speculate on what happened before.
Yeah, so interestingly, and I don't have a slide on this, but in both physics and in Judaism, you cannot speculate on what happened before. It's a meaningless question. So in physics, time begins with the Big Bang. So to ask the question, what happened before the Big Bang, is a meaningless question. I'll say more about that in a second.
Okay.
In Judaism, the first letter of the Hebrew of the Torah, and the Bible is a bet, which is kind of shaped like this.
Right.
And so it's only open on one end, the letter bet,
Right.
and the end is open is toward the Torah, toward the text.
Right.
So the rabbis ask the question, because the rabbis ask questions about everything. Why does the Torah begin with the letter bet?
Because
And
there's
one
nothing
answer, there are
before.
many answers. One answer is that the letter bet, you can't go up, you can't go down, and you can't go before it. The only way you can go is where the letter bet is open. Should do it like this.
It's
So,
not related to the fact that an aleph is a silent.
no. There's all kinds of there's discussion about that. The word bet begins the word barucha, which is blessing. The word bet has a numerical value too, to teach that there are two Torahs, an oral Torah and a written Torah. Aleph complains that why shouldn't I be chosen? And actually all the letters complain in front of God. It's a great little section of Talmud. All the letters are complaining in front of God. Why aren't you choosing me? And Aleph begins the word Aveira, which means sin. So that's one of the problems. So I can't remember where I was going with this. Oh, so here's an example of why it's impossible in physics to ask what happens before the Big Bang. You might respond, what do you mean it's impossible? I can ask it every day. So here's a physicist taught me this example. Suppose I am standing on the North Pole, right? On the geographic North Pole. Everybody with me?
Mhm.
And now, or suppose you're standing. Okay, Alan, you're standing on the geographic North Pole. And now I tell you, Alan, take a step to the east. It's impossible. The only direction is south. Okay, everybody with me on that?
Yeah.
But you're on the North Pole, to say go east or west or north for that matter doesn't have any meaning. You can only go south. Once you take a step to the south, you can do the hokey pokey and turn yourself around and go in any direction you want. But to say go east from the North Pole is meaningless. And in the same way, to say what happened before the Big Bang is a meaningless question. I am indebted to Robert Piccioni, who wrote a lot of the material that I cite here.
Wow.
Okay, so I want to talk again about this idea of knowledge and faith. So knowledge in Hebrew, da'at, means something like, I know these computers exist. I know that my pen exists. I can test this knowledge with scientific experimentation. I can drop it, it makes a sound. I can write a check with the pen. It's not, I don't have faith that my pen exists. I have knowledge that my pen exists. In the word faith, in Hebrew, emunah, by the way, where we get the word amen, is not the same. My faith in God, my belief in God is not quite the same. It carries a measure of doubt. I think I envy people that have perfect faith equivalent to knowledge that God exists, but I'm not one of them, and I'm not sure I envy them. And we'll talk more about that as well. So, okay, so here are those models that I mentioned, between reflecting on the relationship between science and religion, and there are books written about this. And so the first model is conflict, that, either it's 6 days of creation or 13.8 billion years of creation, and it can't be both. The second one, which we heard a lot about, is independence. They really deal with different worlds, and just like the teapot, in a way, the desire for tea is not the same as the thermodynamic question of how do you boil water. So they deal with different worlds. The third model is dialogue, where they relate to each other. And the fourth one is integration, where They're really inseparable. And as I mentioned, my own position is to go even beyond number 4, that science and religion need each other. To be very specific, at the very end, I'm going to talk about the fact that I don't believe religion can do its job without science, and I don't believe science can do its job without religion. So some more notable quotes. Martin Luther King, we all know who that is. Science investigates, religion interprets. Religion and science are 2 hemispheres of human thought. And I am sorry to say I don't know who William Brown is, but let's see what he has to say. To claim the world as creation is not to denounce evolution and debunk science. To the contrary, it is to join in covenant with science in acknowledging creation's integrity, as well as its giftedness and worth. To see the world as creation is to recommit ourselves to its care, not as the fittest, most powerful creature on the animal planet, but as a species held uniquely responsible for creation's flourishing. I like that quote, and I should investigate what this person's background is. But yeah, there's an organization that sort of speaks to both science and religion, and I think there's a book or maybe a paper of the founder who said that, in the beginning God created evolution. So evolution as a tool rather than a conflicting theory. Alan.
This gentleman, Mr. Brown, is a Presbyterian minister.
Okay, thank you. Okay, more. Jonathan Sachs. For if science is about the world that is, and religion is about the world that ought to be, then religion needs science, because we cannot apply God's will to the world if we do not understand the world. And the second part of his quote is the one I quoted earlier. And this actually is why I would say religion needs science. If the purpose of religion, and certainly the purpose of Judaism, is to make this world a better place, then we better understand how the world works. As I often say, if I'm sick, pray for me, knock your socks off, but help me get to a doctor. Help researchers, look into the causes of diseases. I'm not denigrating the power of prayer, but if our job is to make the world a better place, we better understand the details of how this world works, and that's science. And then, of course, Charles Darwin, the last sentence in his famous book, Origin of Species, is, there is grandeur in this view of life with its several powers, having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one. And that, whilst the planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. I think Darwin was a minister, but he was a religious person. So there was not a conflict, although, Darwinism and I would say evolution is still thought of in some places to be an anti-religious teaching. And of course, Copernicus, so vast without any question is the divine handiwork of the Almighty Creator. And I think one more in this section. So this is Einstein. But science can only be created by those who are thoroughly imbued with the aspiration toward truth and understanding. The source of feeling, however, springs from the sphere of religion. To this, there also belongs the faith in the possibility that the regulations valid for the world of existence are rational, that is, comprehensible to reason. I cannot conceive of a genuine scientist without that profound faith. The religion may be expressed by an image. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. There's another quote from Einstein that I love. I don't remember if it's one of the ones that I cite in this discussion, which is, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. Which, if you think about it, as I do all the time, is mind-blowing. Here we are sitting on this little non-distinct planet, circling a non-distinct star in a non-distinct galaxy, and, in the corner, one end of the universe. And we have, a few pounds of protoplasm between our ears. And we have gotten to the point where we here, crawling around on this planet, can conceive and even understand the basic workings that led to the creation of the universe and understand how it evolved from the Big Bang, up until yesterday. The fact that it's comprehensible, at least to Einstein, is just astounding. Oh, yep, there it is. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. Einstein expressing amazement that the laws of physics, which our mind are somehow attuned to understand, apply not just here on Earth, but also in the remotest galaxy.
Yeah, exactly.
And astrophysicist Robert Jastrow ends his book, God and the Astronomers, with this striking passage. At this moment, it seems as though science will never be able to raise the curtain on the mystery of creation. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. This is a fun quote. Let's see what else I have. Okay, just a few more thoughts, and I think then we'll call this session to an end. And this is specifically Judaism's attitude towards secular knowledge. So one of the things I really appreciate about Judaism, and I think it is also absolutely true of Catholicism, the two religions with which I have closest contact, is that we absolutely respect and admire secular knowledge. In fact, you may not know this, we have a separate blessing that says when you meet a great religious scholar, but there's also another blessing required by Jewish law. One of the many baruchas with which you may not be acquainted, that you say when you meet a secular scholar, and that one is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shenatan b'chokhmo levasar v'dam, which is, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who is given of his knowledge, shenatan mechokhmato. You see the word, I'm pointing to it with my pen. You see the word chachma in there. Natan is a gift. Shenatan mechokhmato, who is given from his chachma, God's chachma, to basar v'dam. Translated here as human being, but basar v'dam is flesh and blood. And that's the rabbinic translation of that. When the rabbis, I don't know if this is true in Bible, but certainly when the rabbis want to say humans, they talk about the basar v'dam. And then another point is that we understand that God wants us to have knowledge. And the story of King Solomon, where he when he makes his request of God, he requests wisdom and knowledge. And we ask for knowledge, wisdom, and insight 3 times every day, every weekday in the Amidah, the central prayer of the Jewish service. In fact, it's the first blessing of the Amidah. Alan.
These examples of blessings that you made, I come across them in the Art Scroll.
Yes.
Is that as good a good source?
Yes, Art Scrolls is a great source. There's a whole section of blessings. There's blessings on meeting a king, on meeting a king that has power of life and death, on being in a place where 600,000 Jews once were,
right.
Which I think only applies in Jerusalem and maybe Brooklyn. I don't know. And yeah, there's a lot of blessings. And okay, I think I'm going to raise the question, and then I think I will pick it up next time. So the question is about doubt. So remember, I talked about the difference between knowledge and faith. And the idea of faith leaves room for doubt. And so the question then, which we can dwell upon during this week, is doubt okay? Is doubt permissible? Actually, what I think I'm going to do is take off the slide. So I'm not going to give you the answer. But so that's something to think about. Is doubt okay? Can you be a good Jew and still doubt? And then even beyond that, is doubt not only okay, is doubt a good thing, and is doubt necessary?
I
So
think
that's
so,
that's
absolutely.
what we're going to start looking at
Absolutely.
next time. Paul, you were saying something?
I'm saying absolutely. I think doubt is important to have in your toolbox to have, because you have to have doubt in order to define something.
So is it okay to have doubt in the power of God?
That's another story, another issue.
That's another question. That's why I asked it. And I would say not all Jews would agree on that. If you ask your Chabad rabbi, I think the Chabad rabbi would say no. And I'm going to talk about that from the perspective of the Bible and the perspective of common sense. But that's what I'm talking about. Doubt, which sort of makes you puzzle about how things work, clearly is a good thing. But deeper questions about doubt in God and doubt in the everything we're talking about here, is that okay? That's also in I think in one of the questions in Prager and Telushkin's book, the nine questions people have about Judaism, or something like that. People ask about Judaism. I think one of the questions is, can you doubt God's existence and still be a good Jew? So that's one of the things we will talk about.
That's a different story, but I think that when you were showing the slide about knowledge and emuna,
Emunah, yeah.
emuna, knowledge is what you were showing seems to be more concrete for me.
Mhm.
Showing the pen, showing whatever, right? But
Yes.
The faith may not necessarily be as concrete. It may be a different subject matter when you're focusing on God, but in
And so
general,
if I really pushed you and asked you, what do you mean by concrete?
well, I mean, it's tangible. I was going by what you were showing, the pen that
Right.
exists
Right.
and whatever else. Those items are tangible. They're visible. You can see them. You can touch them.
Right.
Okay? Faith is not like that. Faith is different. Faith is a belief, and you have to make a choice as to
Yes.
where you.
So the way I think about it is faith embraces the idea that I'm not 100% sure of this.
Right.
Right.
Or I might be personally 100% sure of it, but I'm willing to acknowledge that my surety, my confidence in it is not necessarily, mathematical or scientific in its origin. It may be more of an emotional response. Okay. Okay. Any other closing thoughts? We are going to continue this for several weeks, and I hope you enjoy it.
What's happening Wednesday? Are we saying each other?
Wednesday, we're going to be talking about the Golem.
We are,
The
okay.
Golem of Prague, and
Good.
pretty far from this discussion. Okay, so we'll see you next time. Take care and stay well.
Thank
All
you.
right.
That was great.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thank you.